Hi, this is Andy, the creator of Space Cadet. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who's been supporting the show so far. It really means a lot to us. If you've been enjoying Space Cadet over the past few weeks or months, please consider rating the show or even writing us a review on the iTunes Store. It also helps a lot if you share the episodes we post on social media sites like Facebook and Twitter. You can make a difference. You will make a difference. Thank you. Listeners, I urge you, if you ever get the chance to go out into the desert at night, simply to look at the stars, take it. As always, this is William Owens, and this week my studio landed on yet another alien planet, this time with only a soft thump and a billowing of sand. I smelled dust and distant spices in the air, and when I opened the door, a warm, dry breeze blew about my head. Friends, I implore you to listen, and listen well, for I have quite a strange tale for you this evening. A midnight desert greeted me as I opened the door, the sand glittering indigo in the purple moonlight. I stooped, running my hands through the stuff, and saw the grains were rounded and opalescent. Sharp dunes loomed in the distance, silhouetted by two small but bright moons. Then I noticed the stars, so many stars. The atmosphere of the planet must have been thin, light pollution non-existent, as it seemed to me that every blank space in the sky above was filled with a bright point of white light. I started to count the meteors, reaching 50 before deciding to move on. I stepped outside the studio, turning in a circle to admire the majestic landscape. Most of the planet was barren, but nearby loomed the shadow of a big gray building. I regarded it only momentarily before approaching the place at a quick pace. The building was made of metal, and though only a single story in height, it sprawled outwards, covering perhaps an acre or two. I jumped as a sound split the dusty silence. A few crows roosted on the roof and siding of the structure, eyeing me with a kind of annoyed indifference. "Call yourself," I said to one, before stepping into the shadow of the place. Straight ahead, a heavy metal door stood ajar, and a fine coating of sand blew in through the gap. I squeezed myself into the opening, pausing as I noticed a sign to the right of the door handle. It read, "Dine Incorporated, please knock." I doubted knocking would do much good at this point. The place was long deserted. Dine Incorporated. DineCorp. I'd heard that name before, and never in connection with anything good. I made it through the door and emerged into a reception room, partially illuminated by a flickering bulb. A wooden desk sat opposite the door and looked as if it had been split in two by a heavy weight. Beyond the desk stretched an ominously silent hallway, sporadically lit by fluorescent bulbs. It looked sort of like a hospital or a laboratory, and admittedly, it scared me quite a bit. I thought back to the monstrous things I had faced in my travels and told myself that a dark hallway was nothing to be afraid of. I pressed on, down the hall and around a corner, and discovered the path had formerly been blocked by a thick iron gate. Something had ripped it out of the wall, and it now hung haphazardly from a single hinge. I shuddered, hoping that whatever had done this was making its way out, not in. Beyond the gate, the hall continued, although here many of the lights had started to go. Bulbs buzzed and clicked in their sockets. As I crept forward, there was a pop, and I found myself plunged into total darkness. I steadied my breath and slid my feet forward slowly, keeping one arm on the left wall. Something crunched beneath my shoe, and I inhaled sharply. Bending, I picked up a small, plastic, rectangular something. I spent a few moments puzzling over it before stuffing it into my shirt pocket and moving ahead. I stopped walking as the wall suddenly ended. I extended my reach and my fingers found the outline of a wooden door. I located the doorknob and was pleased when it turned smoothly, the door swinging inward with its own weight. I hooked my arm around the doorway, groping for a light switch, scaring myself again as I flipped it accidentally, flooding the room with light. When the flash cleared, I saw I had found a very normal-looking office. There were a few shelves, sporadically lined with scientific journals, and a messy metal desk covered in sheets of paper. I looked at a few of these but couldn't make any sense of the handwriting, even though it was definitely English. A single picture frame sat among the clutter, right next to a triangular, gold-plated nameplate. The photo showed a single man, probably in his 50s or 60s, with curly hair, bifocals, and a bushy, salt-and-pepper-colored beard. The nameplate read, Professor Argyle Smithington. I opened the drawers of the desk, one at a time, finding more incomprehensible notes. The last drawer was harder to open, and something heavy slid across the bottom as it pulled out from the desk. I reached my hand inside and withdrew an old tape recorder. I hit the eject button and the cover popped open, revealing a mini cassette tape. It had been labeled Argyle, subject 0, old notes. I slipped the tape back inside and pressed play. The machine clicked and came to life in my hands. I remember most of what it said, I think. Something like...
Yes. Hello? Is this on? Hello? Hello, this is Professor Argyle. These notes will be in addition to whatever I'm submitting to the Dine Corporation. I will be the first to admit, in order to secure funding for the Subject Zero project, I have stressed very heavily its military applications. However, although the subjects will undoubtedly be faster and stronger, it is the potential of the minds within the bodies that truly interests me.
The tape clicked as it reached its end. Audio logs, of course, I thought to myself. Almost immediately, I thought I heard a shuffling somewhere along the winding corridors. It was gone so quickly, however, it could very well have been my imagination. Using the light from Argyle's office, I was able to see some distance in both directions. To my left, the hall ended in a dark T intersection, and although the path further to the left was dark, a right turn revealed another light in the distance. I took the tape recorder and made my way down the hall, toward the light. As I got closer, I saw it was coming from behind a warped pane of glass, a sort of viewing window that looked upon a nursery. The walls were painted sky blue and decaled with cartoon animals. In the center of the room was a child's crib, looking rather lonely and creepy in the midst of this silent space. Something glittered on the floor near the crib. The door to the room was on its opposite side, and I couldn't see how to get there from my current location. Fortunately, the window had been broken at the far end of the hall, a gap in the glass just big enough for me to fit through. I lifted my body carefully through the window, cursing as a shard of glass ripped a hole in my jeans. I made a quick glance around the room, making sure nothing was hiding in its shadowy corners, before bending to examine the shiny thing on the floor. It was another cassette tape. I picked it up and didn't hesitate to listen. If I remember correctly, I believe it said,
The idea for Subject Zero really began when we started testing these 3 extremely well-preserved bodies found in a previously undiscovered tomb in England. I mean, you have the Egyptians with their embalming, the Toland man they found in the peat bog, but those were nothing like these. I almost expected them to come to life when I started taking tissue samples. It was like they just couldn't be touched by death. When cloning experiments began back in 2023, I was quick to secure genetic patents for these corpses, and Subject Zero comes from the strongest of the 3 genetic strains. They laughed at me then, but now we shall see the fruits of my ingenuity.
I wondered what kind of a man Argyle was. Clearly a lover of science and discovery, but to what end? Was he interested in the pursuit of knowledge for the betterment of humanity? Or were glory and power his ultimate goals? I couldn't help but notice the date. 2023, Argyle had said, and clearly this was a few decades ago. Could I really have traveled in space for so long? Over 50 years? I thought it more likely that I was also fording the stream of time. How far in my own future had I gone? Could I go back? I put these thoughts on hold as I began to hear a tapping in the winding halls of the lab, like heels on tile. Something click-clacked at regular intervals, getting closer. I took a quick look down both sides of the hall and left the nursery, heading away from the footsteps. I turned a shadowed corner and almost ran smack into another full-length window, also broken, which looked upon some sort of greenhouse. Pine trees and crabgrass grew thickly over imported fertilizer, sustained by spherical lamps, many of which still emitted artificial sunlight. I stepped through the window, feeling the moist earth give beneath my weight. I took a step and felt something hard and metallic beneath my shoe. Bending down, I found first one and then several metallic shell casings, fallen from some sort of pistol. Someone had emptied 2 entire clips from this spot. I turned about, trying to figure out what they were firing at. Something white, bright white, at odds with the natural colors of the greenery peeked between the trees. I approached cautiously and saw a series of man-shaped targets far, far away on the other side of the woodland. When I got closer, I saw that each one had been shot perfectly between the eyes. The marksmanship was so exact, the impact of several bullets seemed to form a single hole. I discovered another cassette lying on the ground near the opposite window. Argyle's voice once again piped through the tiny speaker in the cassette player. I believe he said something like,
"Everyone at Dine Incorporated is very pleased with Subject Zero so far. The boy is 5 now, and his handlers have already begun military training procedure. I've seen the child shoot an acorn off a tree with 1 bullet, and split the nut in half with a second. But this is not of interest to me. What amazes me is that Subject Zero has taught himself to read. He's not allowed conventional books, but he watches me when I take notes, and I've seen him reading my screen off the reflection in my glasses. I have decided to appeal to the people at Dine to see if I can't get him a library. This is how I will teach him, secretly, under the watchful eye of my restrictive corporate sponsors."
I tried to imagine what it must have been like for this Subject Zero, growing up without anyone his own age, pushed into military training just as his consciousness was getting a grip on reality. A library would have been a wonderful thing for him. I remembered being young, hiding science fiction novels inside my pillowcase so I could read them late into the night. Or perhaps my parents didn't like the books I chose. It was a long time ago, hard to remember. I climbed back through the window and stopped to listen. I could still hear the footsteps, though they were quiet. As I huddled in the darkness, I thought I could hear them growing louder. I tried not to be scared, but it seemed like this experiment was destined for disaster. I expected Subject Zero had probably killed everyone, for one reason or another. Could that be the sound of his lonely, deranged patrol through the halls of his childhood? And, if I were to encounter him, did I stand any chance against a superhuman, bred and trained for violence? The footsteps were between me and the front door, so I made my way deeper into the lab. Perhaps I could find a back door, or a weapon, or Subject Zero's weakness. Something, anything to give me an edge. After about a minute of taking blind turns down more hallways full of stale, flickering light, I started to smell something familiar. The unmistakable scent of lots of books. Sure enough, the next bend led me to the library, or rather what remained of the library. This room, and only this room, had been horribly scorched from top to bottom. The ashen remains of hundreds of tales caked the floor. It felt sad here, empty, aching. There was another cassette on a shelf nearby. I remember this one quite clearly. The voice of Professor Argyle said,
I've done it. I've done it. Dine Incorporated has given me permission to add a library onto the lab for Subject Zero's use. Oh, how the child's face lit up when I told him the news. Of course, the company wants to be very careful about what he's allowed to read. Nothing that might spark too many questions, if you know what I mean. But see, I have a plan. I'm going to buy the books and reprint them with double-bonded paper, with secret books printed on the insides of the pages. If I do it right, no one should notice, and you'll be able to read the hidden words by holding the page up to the light. The boy will have it figured out within a day, surely. I plan to fill his head with tales of adventure, nobility, of heroes and knights, and perhaps in this way he will learn morality, just as I did.
I'd decided I liked Argyle. We had something in common, learning our morals from the heroes in books. I remember being a young man and realizing that people in the real world just weren't like the ones in stories, that nobody was as good or heroic or true as the characters I looked up to. I remember reading about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round and thinking, I'll be like that. I'll be brave and true. Perhaps this is what drove Subject Zero mad. The dichotomy of being trained as a killer while simultaneously learning about true heroes, the kind that never wound without cause, the kind who always ask questions. The library was attached to a whole network of comfortable rooms built for Subject Zero's use. I opened a door and let myself into the dining room, my heart jumping a bit as I noticed the skeletal corpse slumped over a long mahogany table. The body had been pinned to the wood, his hand nailed to the table by a long, sharp knife. It wasn't a life-threatening injury, though, and his position indicated he was trying to flee when the mortal blow had been delivered. This must have been where it started, where Subject Zero started to lose it. Of course, there was another tape left here. Their placement was too exact, I decided. Someone had left them in very specific places, for a very specific reason. I popped the tape into the cassette player and listened intently. I remember this tape quite well. It said,
I am afraid for the boy. He has become sullen and withdrawn since we had the library installed. My supervisors at Dine haven't noticed, as he still pours his full energy into the training. If anything, he's working harder, but to what end, I can't say. They're going to take the library away from him soon. Someone decided it wasn't a good idea, that any book, no matter how innocuous, might incite unwelcome ideas in the subject's head. When I told him, he nodded and said, I understand. I tried to apologize and make excuses, but he waved me into silence. No, said the boy. I understand what needs to be done.
As the tape clicked off, I heard the footsteps. Somehow I hadn't noticed them over Argyle's voice. They were very close, and I suspected whoever was there had heard the tape playing. I gritted my teeth and cursed myself for being so careless, and quickly opened another door in the dining room before sprinting quietly into the darkness. Something collided with my shin, and I lurched forward, scraping my knees and palms on the dusty floor. I looked back and stifled a scream, as I noticed this part of the hall was full of skeletons. Many of them were still wearing lab coats and glasses. All of them were quite dead. It looked like they had all been running from something. Something in the room at the end of the hall. I didn't really want to enter that room, but the footsteps still echoed behind me, and I had nowhere else to go. I took a deep breath, raised my head, and, trying to ignore my terror, opened the door. This had been Subject Zero's bedroom. Only one skeleton lay here. A faded name tag on the front of its lab coat read, Argyle, S. The footsteps were still there, coming closer now. I tried not to think about what I was doing as I went through his pockets. I thought he might have some more notes, another tape, something to help me deal with this Subject Zero, but I found nothing. The footsteps grew louder until they were just outside, and then they stopped. I couldn't even blink, I was so scared. Any second I expected the door to crash inward, revealing an insane and violent Subject Zero, but nothing happened. For a long time, nothing happened. My legs started to go to sleep, and I shifted positions. Something hard pressed against my chest, and I remembered the square of plastic I had found near the entrance. I reached into my pocket and withdrew a final, slightly cracked cassette tape. I couldn't just sit on the floor forever. The fear and the uncertainty were starting to drive me crazy. I turned the volume on the tape player down as far as it would go and pressed the speaker to my ear before hitting the play button. Quietly, the ragged voice of Argyle piped up from the device. He sounded not well, but I remember what he said, word for word.
Hello. I expect this will be my last note. They burned the library. The people from Dying did. They sent someone to tell Subject Zero to make up some excuse about faulty wiring, but he knew. He can tell when people are lying. As soon as the messenger from Dying turned to leave, the boy grabbed him, broke his wrist and knee, and in one fluid motion pinned him to the table with one of the dinner knives. Then he was off, down the hall back towards his room. They sent security after him, but he took them all on without effort. The best part, the boy hasn't killed a single person. He learned exactly what I wanted him to, in the end. They've evacuated the remaining Dying personnel. Oh, it's just the scientists. Just us and Subject Zero. They're piping gas into the facility. The child, of course, will probably be immune to the poison. Must have left that one out of my reports, too. Come here, boy. Come here. I tried to love you like a son, you know. Perhaps that was my mistake. But you have been a very good boy. And I think you deserve a name. Something they can never take away from you. Your name should be something noble, something good. I think I shall call you William. William.
The tape ended, and I realized I was no longer afraid. After all, it's easy to be scared of the unknown, but a bit harder to be scared of yourself. I stood tall and quickly opened the door. The hall was empty. Well, almost empty. A lone crow cocked his head at me before turning and clicking his talons back towards the entrance. I don't remember my walk out of the lab. My mind should have been abuzz with questions, but my brain remained silent. As I squeezed back through the front door, into the welcoming silence of open desert, I remembered how scared I had been when I first entered the lab. So much fear, all over something I didn't understand, something that turned out to be me. I think that happens a lot. We get so scared of things we don't understand, and finally, when we really confront them, we realize we were just scared of some part of ourselves, something we buried deep inside. I say you should never be too scared of yourself. Remember, you know your weaknesses, so if you ever go rogue, you'll be in the best position to take yourself down. Of course, dear friends back home, I hope that never happens. I hope you laugh in the face of fear. I hope you leap headlong into danger, letting curiosity be your guide. Most of all, I hope if you see a light moving through the night sky, you'll wave, for it could be me up there. And perhaps, if enough people look up and wave, perhaps someday I can find my way home. You've been listening to Space Cadet, a podcast written and produced by Andy Fleming and scored by Jules Bonner, featuring artwork contributed by Jesse James. If you enjoyed this show, please subscribe to it on iTunes and like our Facebook page. Social media is a powerful tool with a few limitations, like a sonic screwdriver. For Although social media can be used to reach millions of people, it still can't open a deadbolt lock. Feel free to contact us by emailing William.spacecadet@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks!